Modern legislation is an engineered system of inputs, routing protocols, and outputs. To understand how laws are made, we must examine its mechanical sequence. This is a procedural forensic review of the 2026 Connecticut General Assembly session. We are mapping the specific path legislation took through the state capitol. This analysis does not challenge legislative authority. The legislature possesses the legal right to pass laws. Our focus is restricted to the execution of those laws, specifically whether the procedures used allow for meaningful public participation. The standard legislative model follows a linear path. A draft leads to a hearing, followed by a committee vote and a floor debate. However, the 2026 session frequently utilized a secondary looping circuit. Bills were routed through joint favorable substitutes and LCO evolution. These procedural loops function as the gears of an alternative track, creating a process where the final language of a bill is determined after the public has already finished speaking. This track is visible across a cluster of 7 seemingly unconnected bills from 2026. We have identified these as the primary set, linked by an identical procedural signature. The signature involves 4 specific stages. First, the bills are modified through substitutes after public hearings. Second, they are advanced through compressed timelines that limit the window for external review. Third, the legislation imposes mandatory system-wide costs. Fourth, authority to manage these systems is delegated away from the legislature and into administrative agencies. This delegation shifts decision-making into administrative control structures. When specific programs and rates are set by agencies, rather than by direct statute, the policy moves beyond the reach of standard legislative oversight. This 4-pillar pattern functions as a mechanism to advance structural changes while minimizing the friction typical of public debate and legislative scrutiny. To observe this machinery in action, we can map the progression of House Bill 5340, which governs renewable power generation and statewide utility rates. This timeline tracks the bill's movement. It began with a public hearing March 5th. 2 weeks later, on March 19th, the committee voted. By the next day, March 20th, the bill was filed with the Legislative Commissioner's Office. Following a fiscal review between March 27th and April 1st, it was designated ready for floor on April 2nd. The total time from initial hearing to final floor readiness was exactly 28 days. A 28-day window for legislation of this scale leaves little room for the public to analyze how these new mandates will impact utility costs or energy infrastructure over the long term. The Joint Favorable Substitute, or JFS, is the tool that enables this speed. It allows a committee to approve a version of a bill that has been significantly modified from the original draft. This creates a disconnect. The public testimony gathered at the start of the month applied to the original draft, not the substituted version the committee actually moved forward. The text is revised again during the LCO processing stage. This happens after the committee has already finished its vote, adding another layer of modification away from public view. As the diagram builds, you can see this in the revision history. The language shifts through R00, R01, and R02. The bill is in a state of constant evolution throughout the 28-day cycle. By combining the JFS mechanism with late-stage LCO revisions, the process effectively detaches the final law from the content of the earlier public hearings. The procedural speed is only one half of the pattern. The other half is what the bill actually does once passed. HB 5340 delegates authority to the regulatory agency PURA. This agency is given the power to set tariffs, define program eligibility, and implement dynamic, real-time pricing for electricity. The bill creates a non-bypassable cost system. This means all utility customers are required to pay for these programs, with no provision for individuals or businesses to opt out. These are not short-term adjustments. The legislation authorizes programs that run through 2036 and allows for contracts lasting up to 20 years. This is the result of the 28-day bypass, the implementation of 20-year financial commitments that operate through administrative agencies rather than direct legislative votes. HB 5340 is the final piece of a larger structure. When we look at the other bills in the 2026 primary set, we see they function as interdependent layers of a single system. Senate Bill 4 provides the foundation by defining data classification systems. Senate Bill 6 and House Bill 5468, add a reporting layer on top. The middle layers, HB 5044, SB 450, and HB 5554, establish government structures that move oversight away from the public. HB 5340 sits at the top. It uses the data, reporting, and governance from the lower layers to execute economic and infrastructure goals. If these bills are viewed in isolation, they appear as minor administrative changes. Viewed as a stack, they form a complete system of administrative control. This architecture must be measured against the constitutional requirements for legislative conduct. Basic governance principles require that delegation includes safeguards and that public notice of new laws must be meaningful. For notice to be meaningful, the public must be able to review the specific language being proposed. When that language evolves through multiple versions in a matter of days, the target for public review disappears. The combination of compressed timelines and shifting substitute drafts removes the functional possibility of comprehensive public review. When the process itself prevents the public from reviewing final bill language before it advances, the requirement for meaningful participation remains unmet. The 2026 session shows multiple bills moving through rapid, unobservable channels to empower administrative systems that operate beyond direct public visibility. Is this pattern of legislative conduct consistent with constitutional requirements for transparency, notice, and meaningful public participation? The mechanics of the 2026 session are now a matter of record. The engineered system is visible to anyone mapping the timeline. The 2026 session demonstrates a repeatable sequence for moving policy beyond the reach of public visibility. It is a system defined by its procedural speed and its structural distance from the people it governs.